Hello and welcome to Act 1, Scene 3. In the story so far, Shakespeare has been really careful that we meet Macbeth through others' eyes. First, through the eyes of the witches, so that we know he is going to be open to their manipulation. And secondly, through the eyes of the sergeant and the king, King Duncan, so that we can see Macbeth is a hero in battle first. He has to be a noble hero in order for the tragic part to follow, with his hamartia and his fatal flaw. Now, at the beginning of this scene, we meet the witches again, and Shakespeare is asking us this key question. How far are the witches responsible for Macbeth's hamartia, and how much of it is internal? Now, the first image that he presents us with here is the pilot's thumb, wrecked as homeward he did come. A pilot is someone who steers a ship through waters, unfamiliar waters, so that it doesn't sink. He's actually coming home. This should be the safest trip. Now, there's an immediate parallel to Macbeth. He has just fought the battle and he is coming home. This should be the safest part of his day. But just like the pilot, this is going to be the worst part of his day, because it is the moment when he's going to set in motion his hamartia, his downfall, and his tragic end. But let's think about the witches. They have the pilot's thumb. They haven't sunk his ship. Now, this is an interesting contextual problem here, because as you know, King James believed that witches had tried to sink his ship. Well, Shakespeare is saying, what if the witches couldn't do that? What if the witches could only give us prophecy? And so they have taken this ingredient of the pilot's thumb without having wrecked him themselves. They've used it as a way to try and manipulate Macbeth's mind. So they haven't controlled the weather here, and they haven't directly controlled Macbeth. All they have is the gift of prophecy. They know that he's going to become Thane of Cawdor, and they know he's going to become king. They say, "All hail Macbeth, thou shall be king hereafter." Thou is the informal use of you. And in English it used to be, thou was somebody that you loved or someone of lower social status. To speak to someone of higher social status, you had to say you. You'll notice as we go through the play that Banquo always addresses Macbeth as you. But not so the Weird Sisters. They treat Macbeth both as an inferior, they call him thou and thee, and they suggest a common link between them. They are familiar with each other. Why? Because they have seen in Macbeth the same evil that is within them. Now, at the beginning of this meeting, Banquo tries to remind Macbeth that he is good. He calls him good sir. Why do you start and seem to fear? So there's the use of you, the respect. But look at this interesting use of the word start. Start means startled. So he immediately notices that Macbeth is afraid. Why is Macbeth afraid? Because, as we shall see, of the vision in his mind, which is of himself killing Duncan. Soon as the witches tell him that he's going to become king, he doesn't rejoice and think, wow, sometime in the future my life will be wonderful and I'll be the king. No, he immediately thinks, I'm going to assassinate Duncan. That will link, of course, to his hamartia, which is partly ambition, but I'm going to suggest more bloodlust. Because after all, if he just waits for the prophecies to come true, he'll become king. There's your ambition. Notice how Shakespeare emphasises the S's, that sibilance in Banquo's quotation. Why do you start and seem to fear things that sound so fair? Sibilance, sinister, reminding us again of the serpent that will keep reappearing in this tale to link temptation to Satan's temptation in the Garden of Eden. So the very sound of the words that Banquo uses reminds Macbeth of evil. But Shakespeare is also asking us to consider how much of Banquo is also evil. How influenced is he by the witches? We can guess that Banquo has guessed what's going on in Macbeth's head. He knows that Macbeth is terrified of the images in his own mind. He knows Macbeth's bloodlust. He's seen it just now in battle. So this would suggest that the witches have influenced Banquo as well. Banquo realises that in order for his son and his son's son and his son's son and all those generations to be kings, Banquo requires Macbeth to become king. Therefore, getting Macbeth to kill Duncan is a quick win for Banquo. It brings that fate closer. Banquo has a vested interest in Macbeth killing Duncan, which is why when we move through the play, Banquo never takes an opportunity to stop him. And there are several opportunities, as we'll see in later videos. So although Banquo is traditionally presented as a really good man, because he is seen as King James I's ancestor, and Shakespeare plays on this goodness, he's also very careful to layer elements of doubt so that we can see the psychology in Banquo that actually perhaps he really wants Macbeth to carry out this killing. Now this of course is backed up by Holinshed's Chronicles, the history that Shakespeare based the play on, where the real Macbeth teamed up with the real Banquo to jointly kill Duncan. They did it together in real life. Shakespeare changes that history in order to flatter King James, but he still keeps that element of doubt about how good Banquo actually is. One of the reasons that Shakespeare does that is he wants to criticise his society. He's saying, look, Macbeth and Banquo exist in a martial society, a society that is constantly at war, that promotes the warrior and that rewards the warrior with titles. Notice how when Macbeth hears the witch's prophecies, he says, by Sinel's death, he knows that he is Thane of Glamis, but the Thane of Cawdor lives yet a prosperous gentleman. So this tells us that in Macbeth's society, the only way for a man like Macbeth to succeed in society is through the death of someone who's been defeated in battle. It's possible that Macbeth himself has killed the Thane of Glamis in battle, just like he killed MacDonald, a Scottish Thane, just a moment ago. Now this gives us a really interesting context because Jacobean society is at a turning point. It can continue as a society that isn't based around warfare, that is not a martial society. The pressure on King James is to become much more military in his outlook because of the great gunpowder plot of 1605. That puts the onus on King James to start searching for the enemy within, the traitors in the country. And now we can see why Shakespeare starts the play with not just an invasion from the Norwegians, but with two Scottish traitors, Cawdor and MacDonald, the enemy within. Because that is the zeitgeist, that is the view of the time in 1605. Now Banquo asks a really important question. What? Can the devil speak true? He's genuinely puzzled here. He carries on Ross's line, so the stress on what is in the right place because it follows on the 4 syllables that went before. However, it sounds trochaic because the first syllable, what, is stressed. Remember that Shakespeare gives characters the trochaic stress when he wants to suggest that they're being evil. Now, the other way that Shakespeare signifies that a character is having evil intentions is to give the line too many syllables. So in this line with the honest trifles, we see that Banquo uses up 11 syllables, 1 extra. It shows us that he's struggling to hold on to the pentameter because he's manipulating Macbeth. Banquo finishes with, in deepest consequence, 7 syllables, but then cousins, a word I pray you, 6 syllables. He has the opportunity to make that 10 syllables. Cousins, a word, however he wants to do it, but he doesn't. He breaks the pentameter because he is being evil. Why does he stop talking to Macbeth and go and talk to Ross? Because he knows he's planted the seed that will make Macbeth think of murder. He's got to allow Macbeth time to think of murder, to plan it, so he withdraws. See how subtle he is? And that, of course, is Shakespeare's subtlety, suggesting that even the noble Banquo has innate evil, innate ambition. When he asks, can the devil speak true, he absolutely believes in the witch's promises. Why? Because Ross has just come and told Macbeth that he's now Thane of Cawdor, so they know the first promise was true. Therefore, Banquo now believes that everything else is probably going to come true as well. He realises that the witches have an evil intent here, and that's why he links them straight away to the devil. But this will be crucial because it shows us why Banquo doesn't interfere. It's because he too is having those evil thoughts. If I let Macbeth kill Duncan, then Fleance will become king sooner. Those evil thoughts are dramatised structurally with the trochaic stress on what? Macbeth's reaction is fascinating. The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes? This metaphor of wearing borrowed robes shows us how he thinks about power. He doesn't see it as a permanent state. He's not going to be Thane of Glamis forever. He's not going to be Thane of Cawdor forever. It could be taken from him in an instant. Because he wins those titles through war, he can lose them through war. He sees the robes as only borrowed. This points to his deep insecurity, and it tells us that in this society, in order to continue feeling secure, you must continue killing in order to protect your situation. So Shakespeare is saying Macbeth's hamartia here, this bloodlust, isn't just a personal defect. It's something that this martial society has created. And so this is the kind of thinking that Banquo understands, which is why he works on Macbeth and calls becoming Thane of Cawdor an honest trifle. It's like just putting on robes. Looks impressive, but isn't really very significant. Think about the bigger prize. Stop thinking about the trifle of being Cawdor and imagine yourself as king. Now, what's so subtle about that is this is dressed up as a warning against believing what the witches say. So Banquo appears to be advising Macbeth not to think about becoming king, but his words actually push Macbeth closer to killing the king and seizing the throne for himself. Now, we know that Macbeth immediately turns to murder because he tells us in an aside. In Shakespeare's plays, an aside are the characters' true thoughts. So we hear exactly what they're thinking. So he talks about the image unfixing his hair. It gives him fear. This hair stands on end. But think of the word unfixed. In the great chain of being, everyone's position in society is fixed. Macbeth is thinking about unfixing himself, changing the great chain of being. Instead of the king being appointed by God, the king can now be self-appointed by Macbeth. He can kill his way to kingship. He is unfixing the social order. And that's why he describes his hair as being unfixed. When he talks about his heart, increasing heart rate because he's afraid, how does he describe it? My seated heart. Macbeth is a man of action, and so this very metaphor shows us that he's unsatisfied being as he is, with a seated heart. That's passive. What he wants is action. He wants to take charge of his destiny, move towards his fate. And then look at the personification that he gives it, knocking at his ribs. Macbeth is knocking for admittance to the throne. He wants to become king. So even the words he uses to shock himself into not killing Duncan give him images of actually killing Duncan. His language tells him to be desperate for action, to be desperate to kill, to become king himself. He cannot help himself. He tries to convince himself to wait. He says, if chance will have me king, why chance may crown me. But the repetition of the word chance suggests that he would be gambling. He's choosing not to see it as fate. Fate is destiny. Fate is inevitable. He will become king. The witches have told him so. But he refuses to use the word fate because using the word fate will make him wait. He will wait without my stir. He won't have to do anything. But as soon as he changes the word in his mind from fate to chance, waiting seems like a gamble, whereas killing seems like a move towards certainty. And so as we move through the play, we're going to keep asking ourselves how much of his desire is simple bloodlust and how much of it is ambition and how much of it is the manipulation of the witches. Now, so far, we've seen that the witches have just planted a seed, and actually Banquo has started to influence Macbeth, and then Macbeth himself, in the language and imagery he's using, is starting to force himself not to wait, not to think about fate, but to seize his opportunity quicker through bloody murder. The text with notes from these key quotations. If you've not done so yet, now would be a good time to go and do that if you somehow didn't during the video, because then you'll remember it more and you'll get higher marks in the exam. It's not really much effort. Or you might be on a roll. Check out the next video in the series.